Hi everyone, it's Nick with Build Up Advisory Group, and welcome to Fast Build Fridays, a web series where we will build what you know about infrastructure design in the nonprofit sector. Now I have some notes, so you might see me looking down during this video, but it's just to make sure that I stay on target and I don't ramble on because this topic is near and dear to my heart. Today's Fast Build topic is about the infrastructure trends that we're seeing for the sector in 2020. And I wrote an article about these trends, but I wanted to pull out one trend in particular, and that's a trend around general support funding. By now, I'm sure you've seen a lot of the articles and heard a lot of buzz around grants being moved from project support to general support. And the thinking here is that with general support funding, unlike project support funding, which is restricted usually to a project or to a program, this general support funding instead will allow organizations and leaders to determine how to spend that funding to make sure that their organization, their work, and the communities that they're serving are sustainable. Now, in my opinion, this should have always been the case. This crisis, this COVID-19 pandemic, this crisis, did not create the need for flexible funding. The need was always there. The crisis just magnified that need. Now, as most of you know, I am a big proponent of general support funding, flexible funding, and I write about these topics a lot. And I think that we are in a moment now where we have to ask ourselves, why wasn't this grant a general support grant to begin with? And we should also be asking, why can't we continue to provide general support funding? Part of the reason I wanted to pull out this trend and talk about it was I wanted to share some of the interesting things that I've been noticing about this trend. The first is that the conversations that have been happening about general support, I am finding are much more sophisticated than the conversations that have been happening in the past. For example, there's a real conversation around what are the true costs of running an organization and how can funding support those costs. The second thing that I wanted to flag is that these conversations are being mutually pushed or pursued by both grantees and funders, which is extremely important because I do think that this conversation should not be unilateral. It should be a dialogue. And so it's really important that grantees and funders are both pushing to have this conversation. The third thing that I'm noticing are the public commitments from funders. And I really like to see these commitments. Why? Because they talk about general support, and I think they're just reinforcing the point that flexible funding is the way to make sure that an organization is sustainable. But with this observation, it's also raising some questions for me about this trend, particularly around traction. Specifically, when are we going to move these conversations to action so that we could have a sector-wide shift to general support funding? And what does a successful shift look like for funders? How do they transition to that? How do grantees transition to that? I know that these are big questions to wrestle with, but I do think we need to wrestle with them in order to make sure that this trend keeps tracking in the right direction. And that's our fast build. If you have any comments or you want to share any of the infrastructure trends that you're noticing in the sector, please just comment below. I'd love to hear from you. I hope that you and your family are doing well during this time. Thank you for watching. Have a great weekend and keep building bravely.